Okay, we're rejoining our forum. This is for the House District 18. And on behalf of Popcorn and Politics, co-host Shawnee Lennox and Overland Park Chambers, we welcome you back. I'm Phil Hammond. I'm co-chair of the Shawnee Governmental Affairs, and I am going to be your moderator. As for those who may not have attended the earlier forums, the format is 3-minute opening statements, a Q&A of which responses are 1.5 minutes, and then an ending 2-minute closing statement. And the speakers are doing this randomly, and we will alternate back and forth. And if you haven't silenced your cell phones, please do so. And we move to the introduction of our two candidates. First off, Eric Jenkins, Republican candidate, was elected to the Shawnee City Council in 2015, served as a member of the Shawnee Planning Commission for over 20 years, and is a 30-year veteran of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, opening an emergency management consulting small business after retiring, and is a retired colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves. He and his wife have 5 grown children. Cindy Neighbors, Democrat incumbent candidate, was most recently elected to represent District 18 in 2016. She served 3 previous terms as state representative. At the local level, Cindy was elected to serve multiple terms on the Shawnee Mission School Board. She has been involved in a number of civic and educational organizations. Cindy and her husband have 4 grown children. Obviously, both of those reside in Shawnee. So we will go on to the opening statements, which will be 3 minutes each, and the first candidate will be Eric, please.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. You took with a lot of things that I needed to say. You've already said them, so we can bypass some of that bio stuff and go into a little bit of our ideology. I'm a conservative Republican. I believe in small government, as small as we can make it and still have what we need. I believe in keeping taxes to a minimum. I believe in families. I believe in personal responsibility. I think that's something we've kind of lost our focus on, is the personal responsibility end of it. And we tend to move some of our problems and issues and transfer them on to somebody else, oftentimes the government. And I think we need to relook at some of that, because as we get further and further away from our responsibilities and we're passing them on and blaming somebody else for all the problems, we start losing ownership of those issues, and we start losing a lot of the glue which seems to hold us together as society for so long. And I think we need to really take a look at that. And I'd like to see us return to some of our values which made us such a really great country and made Kansas such a great state. That self-reliance thing, I think, is really important. I think keep bringing government into our lives to the point where it becomes almost a nanny state. And I think we're getting kind of in that direction. I won't say we are a nanny state, but I think we've kind of moved in the nanny state direction. It's really easy to have somebody else take care of it for you, because we're all really busy. I bet you're all about as busy as I am. We're all just running around, just trying to keep things up, trying to take care of kids, trying to keep care of our jobs, homes, and all that sort of thing. And I tell you, it's pretty easy to say, I wish somebody else would take care of this for me, but you know, we really have to buckle down and start taking care of these things for ourselves. And I'd like to see us do that more. I'd like to see the government kind of withdraw. I'd like to see the government be as small as possible, but still be effective and provide those services that we do need, like public safety, and in the areas of health, in the areas of, I think, mental health as well. I've been talking about that quite a bit lately. Looking at, we need roads, we need bridges, we need the infrastructure to support our business community. We need a certain amount of regulations, but I think that's an area I want to look at too, is I think sometimes we can over-regulate. Because every time somebody's got a real bone to pick and they raise an issue and too much focus gets on that issue, sometimes we create new regulations and new requirements for pretty small things, but they're not small for the business community and those people having to take care of those requirements. It can be oftentimes very expensive in terms of just the implementation of those requirements and meeting those regulations, the expensive lawyer cost, the overhead as far as having to have part of your business that just attends to those issues and makes all the reports and does everything. So I'd like to see less regulation as well, and I think that's kind of gives you a little bit of the ideology I have. I want to see us get out and do our jobs and lead the way ourselves.
Thank you. Cindy?
Thank you to the group for sponsoring this today, and also Phil for you monitoring, keeping us in line. I currently serve in the House. I serve on general government budget. We look at 28 budgets within the overall budget. I'm the ranking member on insurance. We look at car insurance, health insurance, just the entire gamut for what insurance covers, and also on agriculture. And that's not just cows, pigs, and horses, but a lot of it covers water. And we have some serious water issues in Kansas as far as the availability, where the water goes when crops are watered, and how can we save that water and make for better systems. This past 2 years, we reinstated the Tax Act to 2012. And I know my opponent has spoken briefly about that for what we want to do with that money. But the issue today is, and I brought a few facts that might help you. First of all, Kansas right now has more indebtedness per capita than any of the surrounding states around us. Our per capita debt load currently is $1,575 for every Kansas citizen, including children. The closest one that's in that area is Missouri with $579, and Nebraska has $18. So when we look at what we have to make up and what we have to do to get Kansas back on track, we have to utilize the funds we have. Yes, there are funds coming in the last 2 years, our numbers have gone up. But we've got a long way to go to meet the needs of all Kansans and to make sure that we have a safe, environmental, healthy, working exchange for all of our constituents. So it's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you very much.
Great. We go on to the questions now, and I'll read it one time, and then we'll go through both candidates, and we alternate back and forth. So question number one, what are your views on state tax policy? And Cindy, you lead that off.
Well, I guess I kind of started off ahead of time on that, but when we did the tax increase, it really wasn't an increase. It was more of a reinstatement to the 2012 level of where the taxes were. And it's still under what the 2012 tax percentages were overall. In the future, I'd like to see any opportunity we have to lower the food sales tax because it covers everybody. It's not divided between the wealthy, the middle class, and the poor. Food tax is something that affects all of us, and it's very, very important. And as we look at tax policy in Kansas, we have to be ever mindful of the agencies that we have underfunded and those that are struggling, from DCF, which is the foster care, to our courts, to our schools. And yes, we are in a court case right now, and we still have to put more money in for that to reach the requirement that the Supreme Court has mentioned to the legislative body. So with that, I'll turn it over to well, I'm going to take an extra 15 seconds. I want to congratulate or thank my opponent for his service in the country. For our country, and I meant to say that in the beginning, and I let it go right by.
Okay,
so
thank you. Eric?
Thank you, Cindy, I appreciate that. It was just 34 years.
My grandson's just starting.
Yeah, hope he does well. We need him on board. When it comes to tax policy, I kind of discussed this in my opening comments, that I want to see the taxes be as low as possible. And I know there's a necessary need for taxes, but I want to keep them as low as possible. Cindy mentioned the fact about the sales tax on food, and I'm actually a proponent of that. I'd like to see the regressive taxes that we have. We do have regressive taxes like food, because they affect the poor the greatest as a percentage of their expenditures. And I'd like to see some relief in that. I mentioned last night at another forum that I'd like to see us have something like that Missouri tax day, when you get kids go back to school and you have kind of a tax holiday. I think that'd be a great thing. But I believe in growing our tax base and working hard in that direction instead of raising taxes on existing people, which has a tendency to actually drive the growth down instead of making the growth up. So I'd like to see us do some things like we are doing right now, which is growing our business and employment here in Kansas. And that every time you employ another person, that takes perhaps somebody off of drawing money from the government, now they're putting money into government, so that's a double whammy to the plus side. So I'd like to grow our tax base, and I think there's a lot of things we can do in the business sector that would encourage business growth and stability, and encourage the migration of the people back into the workforce, and that would actually improve our tax situation considerably without raising taxes at all.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to question number 2 at this point. That is, with record low unemployment rates challenging businesses' ability to find enough employees, what would you do to grow and develop the state's workforce? And Eric, you're first on this.
Well, one of the things I think right off the bat is I'm concerned about the fact that we don't have enough tradesmen. This is not just in Kansas, across the country. It's really hard right now if you want to build a new shopping center to find the electricians and the plumbers and the iron workers and all these people you need. And I think that's where our school system has kind of let us down a little bit. We've got so focused on getting all of our kids ready to go to KU and K-State that we kind of forgot there's a lot of kids don't want to go to KU and K-State. They just like to go get a job and they graduate from high school and get out and start making money and having families and all this sort of thing. And I don't think we've really provided the proper avenues for those folks. I would like to see us direct our schools back in a different paradigm where you have an academic track and you have a track where I can go to school and I can learn how to be a grade A welder and come out of school making $40,000, $50,000 a year almost immediately, and I can fill that void we've got in our business sector where they can't even get enough of those folks to get things done. So I think that would grow a lot of competent and qualified people that can go right into our business sector. I also want to keep the personal income taxes, like I say, down as low as possible because I want it to be an attractive state where people are going to want to come here and work because I get to keep most of my income. I think that's kind of a big attraction. If you get to keep a lot more of your income, that's going to make you want to work there. So there's so many things, and in a minute and a half this doesn't give you enough time. I could talk about this about all day, but those are just a couple things that come up immediately.
Okay, thank you. Cindy?
Businesses that I have spoken to today say taxes are not the reason they're here or they would leave. It's about having a qualified workforce. And that's going to come through working with our high schools and our community colleges, looking at technical education programs as well as the academic. Right now, I know Johnson County Community College is building programs in welding. They have engineering. There's a variety, culinary. If you go to Shawnee Mission, we have signature programs that are preparing students for the future, whether it be culinary, they do welding, they do engineering, they do medical research, they do medical bioscience. And these kids actually work in these facilities to give them a one-up opportunity as they go out in the world. Also computer science. One of the things that I also think is good is providing transitional education to our veterans. Oftentimes they come home and they don't know what they want to do, but they need to be reconnected into the community. We need to be providing those services that train them, make sure they have a home situation that's good for them, and help them with any outside sources that will integrate them back in our communities.
Thank you. We'll move on to question 3, and that question is, Topeka as a whole appears poised to refocus on the state's infrastructure. What would your priorities be in any new statewide transportation plan? And Cindy, you're first.
This past year, we formed a transportation task force, and that's to take a look at the program for 5 and 10 years out. That's contains roads, aviation, shipping, any kind of thing that has to do with transportation. Because the transportation program that we have in process now has been cut from transfer to the general budget. There were 23 projects that were put on hold. They are now being put back in. But if you've driven any of the highways lately in Kansas, the only thing that we've done over the past summer is fill in those holes and potholes that have either flattened your tires or helped you with readjusting your balance in your car. So we need to look at each of these programs. We need to go back and put into place highways infrastructure that is safe and solid for all areas in the state of Kansas. It's extremely important in our rural areas because a lot of their trucking work is done out there moving crops. Those trucks are heavier than what we use on our roads here, so it really depends on the weight of the truck as far as how they build those roads. And by the way, it costs $1 million a mile to build a road. So it is not a cheap endeavor.
Thank you. Eric?
Yes, I believe that the purpose of government is, the primary purpose of government is twofold. One, public safety, and two, infrastructure. Those are the most important things the government does, and that's why we really need a government, is to consolidate enough taxpayers' funds where we can address those two specific issues. We need to take care of the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens, and we need to have good infrastructure that promotes commerce and exchange of goods and services throughout our state and throughout the country as well. So obviously I support those two things. The infrastructure is a very important matter to me. Cindy mentioned the task force. I know the task force is meeting now. I saw some of the preliminary stuff coming out of Kansas City, Kansas, where they're talking about the Turner interchange, the Turner diagonal interchange. They're talking about out here by the Legends, getting some more work done there because of all the backups in traffic. So yeah, I fully endorse that. We did something very similar in the city of Shawnee, and I'd share that with you, that we took a look and we got our citizens task force together to take a look at all the roads in Shawnee and come up with sort of a prioritization. So we have some sort of reason for the direction of where we're putting our funding in road improvements here in the city. And I really like that a great deal. I was very much for that, because instead of just saying, you know, so-and-so is screaming the loudest, so let's go down here and fix Goddard, maybe we need to go over here and fix Barton Lane, because that's an area that really needs to be improved. And this citizen task force did set up some parameters for that. They did set up some good justification for why the roads should be prioritized in the order they're being prioritized in, and I think that's a great way to approach it.
Okay, good. Move on to question number 4. What are your views on funding of K-12 education? And Eric, you're first.
Well, that's kind of a loaded question, but the bottom line is we need to fund our education. Education is the bedrock of our future. Everybody recognizes that. That doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. Our kids and their education is going to make them competitive in the global markets as we move down the road, and we've got to be competitive. If we want to keep kids in Kansas, it has to be combined with the fact we've got jobs for them to do as well. So we want to make sure those two work together closely. But I think we're funding our education right now pretty well at $13,657 a child. I think that's a pretty good level. I think there's some problems in how we distribute the funding that's coming down from the legislature. I think that could be looked at. I think perhaps some parameters ought to be established for how you can spend that money, because I'd like to see it going into classrooms. I'd like to see it going to teachers in classrooms. I want it where the rubber meets the road, because I don't think we're moving the dial very much at that level. We're moving the dial a great deal on how many buildings we're building and how many folks are staffing our administrative offices, but we're not doing quite as well when you focus down on how the students are doing, and I think that's where the money needs to go. I think we need to do a better job in the allocation process. Right now, I'm not really in favor of increasing that much. I am in favor of a constitutional amendment which will better define the role of the state Supreme Court and the state legislatures, because I think there's a little cross mingling there. Maybe shouldn't be going on right now, and I'd like to see the legislature be the responsible body for the budget.
Okay, thank you. Cindy?
Obviously, we have 3 levels of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And the judicial branch has the requirement to enforce the laws that we, the legislature, make. The courts have not stepped out of bounds. The courts have taken very seriously and done multiple studies and have looked at multiple studies to the tune of Kansas has spent over $1 million in the past 7 or 8 years looking at funding. Every one of those reports that came in said that we were short on funding, and that's including our legislative post-audit committee, which is bipartisan. They're all lawyers, bipartisan. And what we need to look at here is there was an amendment last year, which the Trimmer Amendment came, and it was balancing out cost of living. If that amendment had gotten on, we probably wouldn't have this discussion today, and we would have met the court's requirement. But we didn't, it did not pass. We tried that 3 different times. Early childhood did get $1 million last year to advance that. That's critical to our educational system and very, very important, and the legislature took that very, very seriously. One of the things that wasn't mentioned when we look at how money is funded is there's a constitutional amendment. We have capital outlay and operational funds. Capital outlay does not mesh with operational. Building salaries, no.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to question number 5, and that is, describe what you see as the Kansas advantage when it comes to economic development and tourism, and the type of economic development policies you would support to encourage job growth and business expansion in Kansas. And Cindy, you're first.
Okay, there are parts of the Kansas Advantage that are very, very important. Travel industry has a lot to do with that. Incentive programs like Star Bonds and other programs out there to incentivize businesses to come into Kansas. We have rural districts that don't really have a lot of business, and in order to keep those cities alive, they need their education, they need their schools, they need their churches, they need their businesses. Without those, they don't have a stability factor and positive infrastructure. So I think that's important. What we do have in Kansas is that we are one of the highest rated states in education. We have that working for us. We don't have water. We do have a big bowl of strength, and we don't have mountains. But we do have that here for us, and schools are truly our economic engine that drives Kansas and places us at the top level as far as nationally in that place. Kansas Advantage also will have to have something to do with cost of living. When we live here, our houses, our businesses, our supplies don't cost as much for building a business as it will be in California or Chicago. We have a wonderful cost of living here. We need to utilize that. We need to advertise that. We need to let people know that our communities are safe, that we have quality education and infrastructure.
Good. And Eric?
Well, when you look at Kansas from an attraction standpoint, no, we don't have mountains and we don't have oceans, but we do have more than what a lot of people think we have, because they all watch Wizard of Oz and they think we're just with a flat line down there with a bunch of dust and tornadoes. So that's kind of a bad image that we have there that we need to overcome. But I think we talked about this on the Shawnee Economic Development Council. I talked to folks when I first got on that council about how we need to market ourselves a little bit better, because you know what? It's downright beautiful around here. Take a jog, you'll be up and down hills. Look around, there's trees, there's water. I mean, there's Flint Hills, beautiful area down there. I mean, we've got a lot of things that people just don't even know about because we haven't done a very good job all this time in marketing that. I think some of the things Kansas has going for it are some of the things I've really talked about early on in this discussion, and as part of my ideology, and that is that self-reliance, that strong work ethic, that strong families, the ability to tackle tough jobs, roll up their sleeves. I think if that word gets out to business and industry, they'll go, you know, I'd kind of like to put a place there. I'd like people that show up for work and people that roll up their sleeves and do a good job. That increases my productivity. That increases my bottom line. So I'm pretty happy with those kind of things. So I think we need to sell our strong points. And I think we can. I think we're trying to do that here in Shawnee, and I think we can do that statewide as well.
Very good. Move on to the last question, and that question is, what is the most important thing that distinguishes you from your opponent in this race? And Eric, you're first.
Well, that's probably become pretty obvious just from the discussion we've already had, but I believe in small government as much as possible. I believe in keeping the taxes in the people's pockets instead of in the government's pockets to the extent possible. I do believe in a strong education, though. We have discussed that as well. We have to have that. That's necessary. But I also want to believe in our people, and I just don't think, well, if you remember my opening statement, I said not passing our issues off to the state government and the federal government, but keeping those issues here. Let's address those ourselves as individuals and as families, as communities. Let's address those as with our churches and our organizations that we all have membership in that do wonderful things. So let's be a little more self-reliant. I think that's where we need to be. So I think I'm just not as pro-government and pro-government growth as my opponent.
Okay. Cindy?
I'm not going to say that I am more pro-government. I am physically responsible, but I also think we have responsibilities to our citizens. And in that, I mean, we have a crisis in our mental health department right now. We have a crisis in our prisons. They're understaffed, and the population is too large, and they're not sanitary. That's why we have riots. Our education system has to be funded in a stable way so that in out years, we are continuing to fund our education system as is required by the courts and the expectations of our citizens and communities. The other thing is mental health is such a big issue. It has to do with our prisons, our safety issue, as well as anything else. We have mental health patients that end up in the ERs for 24 hours because we don't have a place for them to go. That's not right. That's not safe for our communities and for our system. We have a wonderful program in Shawnee called CIT, where we have a mental health person right along with our police or our fire people who know where these homes are that have mental illness problems. At that point, they can take rational care and do rational decisions. So we don't have quite as many in the prisons. Those are the kinds of things I think we need to pay attention to.
Okay. At this point, we move on to the 2-minute closing statements by both. And Cindy, you're first.
I'm going to start off by saying I want your vote on November the 6th. That's what they call closure. But I've been in the legislature now for 8 years. I do know where the bathrooms are, and I know where the resources are. But more importantly, I am passionate about education. I am passionate about mental health and passionate about what the needs are of my constituents and our community and our state. We have to work together. We have to look for resolution. No one party or person has all the answers. It just doesn't work that way. We have to start talking with each other. We have to start relating to one another. And we have to get those friendships working so that we can create the best law possible for all of our Kansas constituents. Thank you, and again, I ask for your vote on November the 6th.
Eric?
Well, I'm certainly going to ask for your vote on November 6th. I'd like to all of you to get out there and get her done. When I look at this thing about the bathrooms, I think I'll probably know all the bathrooms are in the first 15 minutes being over 55, so that won't be much of an issue right there. But when you talk about some skill sets, and I haven't discussed one of these skill sets with you, and it's a pretty important one, as a member of the Federal Emergency Management Agency and as a senior member thereof, I had 2 responsibilities during my time there at the regional office here of FEMA. One of them was the Regional Interagency Steering Committee chairman. I chaired all the federal agencies here, and this is a federal regional center. And we had monthly meetings with these folks, and it's kind of like herding cats when you're dealing with a whole bunch of different agencies with their own thing that they need to accomplish and their own wants and needs. But you know, we made tremendous progress with those folks, and I think I got some very strong recognition as doing a heck of a job in that regard. And once I completed those responsibilities and done them to the extent that they would, at some point you have to give that up and move on to something else, I became the regional interagency, the radial coordinator. So I worked with all the radiological monitoring agencies within the region as well, and worked on the Federal Radiological Preparedness Coordinating Committee in Washington, D.C., and establishing policy for our nuclear power plants and the way we would respond to nuclear accidents in this country. And that was some pretty demanding stuff. And I'm not just bragging about this. What I'm trying to get across to you is I've got a lot of experience in that kind of coordination, interagency coordination, and getting all these folks to the same table and getting something actually accomplished and moving the envelope forward. So I've had a lot of background in that. I think I got some really good skill sets in that. And I think those are skill sets that are going to be very valuable to the state legislature. I think that in reaching across the aisle and doing the things that need to be done, you need some of that kind of background.
Thank you. That concludes our forum for House District 18. Let's give our candidates